Hi, everybody. Oh, wow, that's loud. Hi, I'm Kelsey. I am Director of Community at Technical Machine, and I actually somehow got the impression that this wasn't as technical of a conference as it is, so my talk is actually geared accordingly. It will be the first time I've ever given a Tessel talk that doesn't involve a live coding demo. So if there's extra time at the end, call me out and I'll make something. So this is Node as a movement, building community into products. I guess a little background on me, I have a degree in neural engineering, and then I was a community manager at Instructables for a little bit. And now I'm with this startup that's been around for about a year and a half, and we make hardware with Node on it. And basically I can tell you in the context of our story how we've worked with Node, and it's going to be interesting because I was surprised to be asked to speak here because while I have some experience with Node, I have almost no experience at all with enterprise. So hopefully you get some takeaways out of this, and it's been enlightening today. So I'll start out with our story and how Node has been a big thing for us in terms of creating community. So my clicker doesn't work, but so nope. Any ideas? Do I have to do something? No. Maybe, hold on. Maybe if I click up here. Okay, there we go. All right. So, story of Technical Machine. It starts with these three, and these are the three co-founders of Technical Machine, Jalia, Tim, and John. And the three of them went to college together and were really good friends, and had always intended to start a company together. And the company they've ended up creating comes very much from each of their personal, well, I guess their personalities and their personal values. So, for example, here's Ja. She's very much a programmer because it means doing less work. So anything that can be automated, I shouldn't have to do. And one of the frustrations for her is, well, you can automate pretty much anything in the digital world at this point, but the physical world, not necessarily. We've got Tim, who likes making things connect to each other. And ever since he's been a child, he's been recreationally creating compilers. So that tells you quite a bit about his personality. And then we have John, who is, well, this can be a little annoying as a friend to have somebody say, this should be easier by now about almost everything. But for a CEO, it's pretty good for vision. It says, well, it's 2014. Why doesn't X work by now? Why don't we have different things be easier than they currently are? And then, of course, he wants to try and make that happen. So the three of them, in their senior year of college, ended up on a project where they were assigned to make digital identities connected to the physical world. And a concrete example of that is, for example, this is a thing they called Elephant. I'm not sure if they intended to refer to the size of the wearable. It was for remembering who you'd met. And it had two people had to be wearing them, and if they shook hands, it would detect that they had shaken hands, and it had ties to the internet so that it had their information on it. So instead of exchanging business cards and then throwing the piece of paper away once you've put it in your digital book, it would just do that for you. You'd automatically get pinged with who you'd met and what the context of the interaction was. And they made several different devices along these lines, and they learned quite a bit. All of them, I should have mentioned, came from a web development background, and so it was pretty fun for them to be working in hardware. Jalia technically has an electrical engineering degree, so she's legit. Well, a lot of what they learned was hardware is not like web development. A lot of the tools that we have in web development are amazing, and they just don't exist in the hardware world. And particularly the qualities of being able to share work with each other. The concept of open source hardware is a relatively new movement. It is nothing like where open source and software is today. And so a lot of what they got out of this project was frustration, honestly, saying, well, what's wrong with hardware that it can't be easy like web development is? So they took that question and they turned it into a company. They said, well, what if it was easy to make connected hardware? What if hardware development was like web development? And Tim and Jia had just finished teaching a class to their peers at college on web development in Node.JS. So they said, well, what if hardware development was like Node.js? And why Node.js for hardware specifically? Well, there's a number of reasons, and some of them come from, this is the Node website. Some of them have keywords in here that have to do with the language. Building fast, building scalably, event-driven. Event-driven makes a lot of sense for the physical world because things tend to happen that way. But I think that as director of community, there's a lot of other really cool things that Node brings to the table that other languages don't necessarily have as much. And this is a big one, the Node package manager. It means that people are putting things online all the time. They're making packages and putting them in the open source world, and it's just assumed that you're going to be doing that. It means that there's this culture of and this ecosystem of creating things and immediately sharing them and solving problems and then moving forward, not having somebody else also solve that problem somewhere else. So that's a big piece of it. And a big piece of it is also the over 100,000 modules. If you could make hardware that didn't just act like Node.js, but actually use Node.js and had it be connected to the internet, that'd be pretty powerful, right? You can have instantly access to all of these different modules that already work, all these problems that are already solved, are now also solved in connection with hardware. The ability to build ideas quickly, and this is something that I'm personally really excited about, is if you have ideas that, or if you have an idea, a lot of the times in hardware, you think of something and you say, well, this would be cool, and then you spend weeks or months thinking about, well, how exactly would I do that? Without necessarily asking the question, is this a thing that I should be making? Is this a thing that's worth anything? So when you can build things quickly, you don't have to think about the how. You make a version of it, maybe not an efficient version, but you make a version of it, and you say, well, is this worth anything? Is this an idea that I should build and think about further? So that's something that's really cool. And in Node, people are used to making things fast. People are used to prototyping fast. People are used to creating and just sticking things together and seeing what works. So coming back to what if hardware development was like Node.js, we created Tessel. And this is a Tessel. It's about yay big. It looks really big on these screens, so I wanted to show you that first. And its hardware is easy as npm install. And this is us in August of 2013, having just started a company, been about to launch a crowdfunding campaign. And we're the ones who started working on that. We've now grown to this much bigger team, as you see. This is last month. And this is what we've made. Although I've heard some of you are familiar with Tessel, which is pretty cool. So here's what's on the board. We've got the internet, we've got the brain, and we've got enough memory that you don't have to think about it. And as a web developer, you probably generally don't think about how much memory your code has to take up, because you probably have plenty. And that's sort of part of the design philosophy that went into this, is you really don't care about the hardware. You just want it to act like it's Node. So that's what we made. You install it with npm install Tessel. You update it with a command line called Tessel update, which is pretty cool if you can update your firmware that easily. And you get online with Tessel Wi-Fi-network-password. This is what it looks like to blink lights. This is a couple lines of code. You see we've got the node require on top in the JS file, and we've got jQuery-like APIs for the hardware with the LED.toggle. And that'll turn your light on and off every 100 milliseconds with Tessel run blink.js. And because you're probably curious, what happens is it pushes that down over the USB, it precompiles it to a LuaJIT-based thing onto an operating system that's running on our board. And that's what's actually running, and it stores it in the 32 megs of, in this case, RAM, and if you wanted to push it, you could put it in Flash and run it untethered from your computer. So obviously the board is not enough by itself, so we also made different things that you can plug into it. So this is a camera module. You plug it in the side. You npm install it with the package name that's written on it. And then we've made very abstracted APIs so that you can just do camera.takePicture, and in your callback, you're going to get an image. And that's kind of what you want, right? You just want the interaction. You don't really care how it works. And if you wanted to expose more interaction, we've actually gone a step further, and we wrote the firmware for all our modules in JavaScript as well. So if you wanted to, you can look in our open source repositories and say, well, I'd really like to expose this feature that I saw was possible with the hardware you've chosen, and then PR us, because we'd love that. And we have 14 first-party modules right now. We've got 9 different community-contributed modules, too, which is pretty cool. Which basically means if you take any given piece of hardware and you decide you really want to try plugging something in with wires, even though maybe it's not something that you're used to doing, if you manage to abstract that and make a library written in JavaScript, because we've got the APIs for it, you can then just publish that to NPM, and anybody can do it. They just have to plug it in the way you plugged it in. So that's kind of neat. So that's what we've got, is something that's, for a web developer, pretty simple, pretty intuitive, and pretty accessible. And that's sort of what I think Node is about at a certain level, is about accessibility. I think that's what makes Node special, is it takes people who have a specific ability and says, hey, you know what? What if something else worked the way you wanted it to? Rather than saying, yeah, you could do that, but you'd have to learn this whole other language, and all the semantics associated with it, and probably not feel like you understand it for years and years until you've worked in it on different projects, etc. So another way to say that is Node takes this question and subverts it. It used to be that you were one of these things. But say that instead you're somebody who writes JavaScript. So if you are a front-end developer, please understand that I put this tongue-in-cheek jQuery. But it's kind of true. Or maybe Backbone.js. But if you're a person who writes in JavaScript, you are a front-end developer if you write, or a front-end developer. And you're also a back-end developer if you write Node. And you're also a hardware developer if you write Node on Tessel. And that's pretty powerful, actually. That means that we've got this full stack that's somewhat beyond anything that you've called full stack before. And that's really neat on a personal level, right? If you're a person and you can make all the UI that surrounds it, and it can be all yours, and you can make it in a weekend, and you can make it as a personal project, and you don't need a support team, and you don't need months. So that's empowering, and that's something that Node in general does. It's empowering. It means that you don't need somebody working on the server if you just write JavaScript, as long as you also understand Node. And for us, as a team who launched as 5 engineers, and now we're 8 engineers, we are growing only in one sector, we think that that was really useful and as a piece of why our launch was actually successful, is, well, power feels good to people. And I was in charge of the marketing when we launched, and I'm pretty sure that it didn't come from me that we got all of this traction right away. It came from the idea that we took a big community of people and said, hey, we know you write JavaScript, we know you're used to getting new powers from Node.js. How about we give you another new power? Don't worry, you don't have to learn anything. People respond well to that sort of message. This is also pretty cool from a company standpoint, right? It's pretty compelling if you have people who write JavaScript, and they can do any of these things. Basically, it says it doesn't matter what you're working on. It doesn't matter what you're working on right now. If you have the capability to work on any of these things, we don't need as big of a team. You're never going to have people who are sitting there not sure what to do because they're waiting on another piece of the project. You can have people who can skip around all the way from the front end to the hardware of a product. And that's also very compelling. And so that, I think, is part of the reason why Node is getting to be so prevalent. It's kind of everywhere because it's too compelling to ignore that kind of human resource. And we've seen that on hardware too, surprisingly. This is more point of interest, but Arduino Yun has announced Node.JS support as well as the Intel Edison. And it may or may not be coincidence that that came out not long after we launched. So I'd also like to take this a bit further, though. So I said at the beginning of my talk that I'm calling this Node as a movement. And I actually think that Node is more than just a tool and more than just compelling from a business use case. I think that it's compelling as a community of people. And this is a lot based on just my personal experience with the Node community, and it's possible you have a very, sorry, this is going to be very different from every other talk out here today, but so I think that these are three core values within the Node community as people: accessibility, openness, and inclusivity. And I've already talked a little bit about the accessibility piece. Node fundamentally is about accessibility. It's about making capabilities you didn't previously have accessible. It's also open, and that's been certainly talked about today. But I mean something more than just open source, though that's a big piece of it. You've got your Node package manager that has this culture of sharing things. And I do want to point out again that the Node package manager is amazing. This is a quote from Substack. When something is easy, you do it more often. And that's absolutely true with the Node package manager. And this is why there are people creating so many modules and using them in the open source community. It's not that they love open source per se. It's because it's so much easier just to create this tool and even use it within your own team if you just put it out there on NPM. But I also want to say that Node is inclusive, and from the community and from the culture of this community comes projects like Node School, which is for teaching people either JavaScript developers who want to learn to expand their skill set to Node, but also I've seen this used a lot in workshops for people who haven't learned code at all before. This is a really good entry point. If you haven't been to nodeschool.io, I encourage you to check it out. And if you feel compelled to write a lesson for it. But it's a really good way for people to hands-on and sort of in a low-pressure environment, I guess, try and learn different skills and workshop them. I've also seen this out of the Node community, and I think that I keep bringing up NPM because I think that the people within NPM are a huge piece of what makes this community so special. Something that's so core to Node as NPM has this very small company, and at the forefront of the company, creator of NPM, Isaac, and I've watched him stand up in different countries on a stage and say, "Nice people matter," to a crowd of developers. And that's really interesting, and it's really particularly interesting at a tech conference because we hear these problems with like culture and tech all the time. And I think that one of the things that makes Node special as a community is Isaac being able to stand there and say that and say, "Hey, this is important. You got to treat people right." And it doesn't matter why people were treating them badly. I've heard him stand there and say, "Well, there are lots of people in open source who are just mean and rude, and they're making comments on your stuff, and they're hating your pull requests, and it doesn't matter. You shouldn't react meanly to them. You shouldn't let them get you mad, because usually there's a reason that they're reaching out to you, and there's usually like 0.01% of what they're saying that's actually valuable, and go with that part." And I think that's a really cool thing, and I think that's really important to be part of the culture of Node. And for these reasons, Node is a community, and communities have values. And movements gain their momentum not just because a tool is useful. You get momentum because you get momentum as a movement because there are people in it that care about it, sort of independently of what it does. Certainly, having it be useful helps, though. So, for that reason, I say that Node is a movement. So I wanted to tie that back to how you can be part of this movement in a cultural way. Basically, my experience in this stems from what we've done as a company, so I'll use us as an example. And I know that a lot of you probably aren't community managers within your companies, but I think that all of you are interacting in a community, and a lot of you are probably making open source contributions and interacting with other people within the open source community. So this is important in terms of making sure that you're interacting well with people and making sure that this community stays alive and continues to have these values that are so, well, valuable. Well, be inclusive. So this is our meetup from Technical Machine. I made this meetup that's for anybody who's interested in from web development all the way down to hardware. And we get people come in who are like, I just really want to solder. We get people come in who are like, I really love jQuery. And it's a very interesting conjunction of people. But part of inclusivity is just being open to other people coming in and talking to each other and looking at different viewpoints. And I think that's something useful that we've done is said, well, here's an open door time. Come and talk. But there's something else that we've done here, and this is coming from various blogs that I've seen on the internet, from various programmers who are often marginalized, these sort of groups. There are a couple of messages that they tend to look for, and this is one of them. Beginners always welcome. And that means that people can come in and they'll feel like it's a safe space. They'll feel open. And in line with it being a safe space, it's important to have code of conduct. And that's sort of a strange one because code of conduct usually doesn't come up. Like, you hope it never comes up. But you still want it to be there every single time because of that one time that one person's going to have some awful experience and not know what to do about it. So it's important to have these little messages in there to make sure that your community stays inclusive. I want to talk about being open, and I don't mean just open source, although that's important. And in terms of being open source, you should be sure that you're not just open source in the sense of our repos are on GitHub, but open source in the sense of we have this contribution guide. If you want to make a change, here's an introduction. If you want to talk about the changes you're making, here's a way to contact us. If you're new to this and you need an introduction to our very complicated set of repos, here's how you would figure out where to go. And that's a really important piece of open source and something that's, again, along the lines of beginners always welcome, is creating this. And that's good for the community. That's also just good practice in an open source project if you want contributors. But I also mean be open more than that. And in our case, I didn't know there was a logo for this until yesterday. But Open Company, and you can see how well I prepare. Open Company is basically just an idea that people should be as transparent as they possibly can. And whatever leverage you have in your organization, I think that transparency is a core value within Node and honestly within the world at large. We should have as much transparency as we can get away with. And more concretely, that means along the lines of keeping a blog, even for the mundane stuff. This is I have a Pinterest of all of our blog posts ever. This means just saying all the little things that you're working on as you're working on them, the little problems that come up, the little improvements that you're thinking about making, sending out emails to your contingency of people who are interested. You actually can't over-communicate on an open source project. It's not possible. There will always be people asking for more information. But even going beyond just talking about what you're doing, talking about problems when they come up. This is the subject and first paragraph of an email we sent to our backers from our crowdfunding campaign when we had to announce that we were going to have to delay our shipment date by a couple of months because of a stupid mistake we've made. And it's cool that we were able to send this out, even though it caused us obviously some degree of trepidation, because we'd been building up with all these blogs and all these regular emails that said, here's what we're working on, here's what's hard right now, here's what's successful right now. Being able to turn to your customers and say, hey, we screwed up, and we're sorry, and we'll do what we can. What's really amazing about having been an open company is that we sent this email, and we got many responses, and literally none of them were negative. All of them were, oh, we're sorry you run into that. Is there any way we can help? And that's something really cool about transparency and about openness. And if you can get even a little bit of that sense of trust and sense of goodwill through your interactions with the open source community, that's something amazing. And of course, when you share failures, you can also share successes like anyone else. And this isn't even necessarily success. This is a recent email that says, well, here's what we're thinking about working on. Here are some products that we're considering making. We want your opinion. And we have, in our company's repos right now, we have readmes with ideas that are accepting community to comment on and make issues on, and say, well, is this a thing that's worth making, and how should we make it, and what do you think about it? And that's a really cool way to get community involved and engaged, and basically just caring about the things that you're making and the community that you are. And be accessible. This is sort of a core tenet of what we're doing, as I talked about earlier, in the sense that Node is about accessibility in terms of making server-side or back-end programming accessible to front-end web developers. Ours is about making hardware accessible to people who've never touched hardware before. So what I have for you here is a picture of how you would plug in a servo to Tessel. And if you've ever done any kind of hardware, this is kind of ridiculous that there's 3 pictures to show this, because you just plug it in. But you would be amazed. I mean, we generally have been amazed at how many ways it's possible to screw something up if you know nothing about it. And so this kind of ties into like why it's important to have a good contribution guide, why it's important to talk to people, but it's important to be accessible in terms of giving people more direction than you think they even need to make sure that they can succeed within your community. Being accessible is about being easy to reach. This is a screenshot from our forums, and people go there to report projects they've made. They talk about things that are screwing up, whatever, and you can see my face on about half of those. It means responding to people. It means talking to people when they're talking to you. And I'm sure probably all of you have open source repos that have gotten issues from people, and it's really important if you want to build community within this open source set of software. It's really important to respond quickly and often, and as often as you can. And it's important to make sure that people know who's working on it, know that you're people. So you don't have to read this whole thing, but it's a screenshot from an email that we sent right when we shipped our Tessel boards. And I make sure and sign all of our company emails that go out to people with the names of all of us that are in the company, and all the people who are working on the stuff that's listed in the email, because that reminds them, hey, we're people, and that helps people be nice to each other when you remember that it's just people on the other end. So this is a shot of our office on a Friday hack time, being a community. And various communities abroad, it's also really important to go out of your way to become a community. So as you can imagine, it's kind of difficult to manage community when it's spread out like this. And so this is a picture of all the different places where there are meetups that have Tessels at them. And so it's really important, if you're an open source project with people distributed all over the world, to try and facilitate people interacting. And that means doing things like having a place for them to share what they've done together. And for many of you, that's just GitHub. For us, this is our projects page, where you can take a picture of the thing you've made and write up instructions on how to do it. And it also means having them meet up in person, even when you're not there. So this is pictures somebody else took of a meetup in Munich of people playing with Tessel one night. And that's something really neat when you're making projects that are going global. See if you can get people to meet up and talk about the things that you're working on far away, wherever they are, because that's definitely going to build the ties of community. So that's kind of my take on Node as part of being a community, and how you can be part of, in the open source world and in the Node world, being a good movement. I think that's all my slides. Yep.
We have a question over there on the left.
And if you want, I have a demo I can do.
So I know you mentioned a couple of times if this talk is relevant to this conference. Enterprises are all about building software for making people's life better, so there's nothing like a great talk like this. I really enjoyed it. It's very relevant to this conference. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. If there aren't any questions, I can show you a quick demo. We'll see if it works. I haven't tested it here. What do you think? Should I do it? Let's see if I can figure out how to, oh, hey, there it is. So this is actually a project that I have demoed before, if not today. This is just a quick hardware demo. Yeah, how do I resize things on this screen? Oh, so I can show you like basics of interacting with Tessel. We've got, it's a command line, and then you can see the different things that it does. You can see up here I did Tessel Wi-Fi-n Intuit guest, and it connected and gave me the Tessel's IP address. Kind of interesting stuff. The demo I have here is a calling card. So the idea is, I'm not sure the specific application, maybe like a hardware checkout thing. So this is an RFID module. You can tap your Clipper card on it. What country are we in? Yeah, Clipper card on it. And I did this in Britain last, which was a terrible idea, but yeah, so you plug it in the side, and I've probably already npm installed it, but just in case, npm install RFID pn532, which is written here. Yeah, it's already installed. And so I'll give you a walkthrough of this code. It takes some configuration variables, and it's going to use Twilio and this RFID module, which is plugged into port A. And when the RFID module is ready, it'll tell me, and it will send a text over the internet to Twilio and ping someone's phone. Actually, can I get a volunteer who has a phone? Someone, anybody? Sure. What's your phone number? Ah, 818-859-0339. Thank you. My very secure config variables. So let's see how this works. What did I call this? Tessel run index.js, and note that it's already online. You can see with the little yellow LED here. So it's bundling and it's deploying, and it might take a little while to set up Twilio. So it's currently running the script, configuring Twilio, and I'm waiting for a console log. Wow, how's the internet here? Oh my gosh, it's really hard to find my mouse. It's not working? Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'll give you a different demo. How much time do I have, by the way? Lots? Oh, hey, cool, okay. So, RFID reader is ready. That took a really long time, sorry. So it got the ID from here, and it is now pinging Twilio, and it should be, oh, well, good try. You can see it got to Twilio anyway. It would take a little much configuration. Anyway, you're welcome to come up to me after the talk. I've got various modules here, and you can play with it yourself. Installation's fast.
Hey,
yeah, sure.
I saw that you guys support Wi-Fi. Do you support like Bluetooth Low Energy or Ethernet too?
Yeah. So one of the things that is core to both Node and Tessel is modularity. So the main board supports Wi-Fi and JavaScript programming, and then we have a module that supports Bluetooth Low Energy. We don't have Ethernet, but you can make a module if you really wanted.
We have a question
Right
up
here.
front.
Hey, so I saw that you mentioned that you guys are affiliated with Node School. What about NodeBots? Do you have any ideas on that?
We're technically not affiliated with either, but we are friends with both. NodeBots is awesome. You guys should check it out. Disha's here, right? Somewhere. I think he's at the panel, which is next. It's pretty cool. It's just people building robots in Node. We were a big part of San Francisco's Node Day this year. And traditionally, people have used Arduinos with Johnny 5 and Fermata, and that's still pretty cool. But if you like NodeBots, I recommend trying it out with Tessel too. It's similar.
Could you explain the thing that you were trying to do with the RFID and sending a text message? Because I know Twilio is just an online service that you're able to make telephone calls, text messages, and so forth.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I probably should have introed Twilio just in case. But yeah, so it was pinging. Let's see. You can see. So this is a basic call to Twilio, and it just says Twilio SMS messages create, and I'm telling it to send the config. I don't really know where I put my variables, but it's to the number that I specified from my Twilio trial number, which apparently can't send to unverified numbers, with a body that is the message that's written here. Tessel says hi with the UID of the card. So then it should go up to Twilio and just hit their server, and then Twilio should send a text. Does that explain? Yeah, so that particular one, I'm actually not sure what the most useful use case for an RFID tap to send a text is. One thing that might be cool is if you had a lot of visitors to an office or something, and they needed to be let in, but like the people who were supposed to let them in were far away usually or something. I'm on the fly here. There's probably a better use somewhere. But yeah, people who come by regularly could maybe tap their cards and have it text someone, hey, I've arrived, something like that. I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, or you could use it to prox into various different offices, and then if you don't have a security level, it could like request security clearance for something to have somebody guide you through a place. That'd be a neat way to do it. Got a question?
We have a question up front.
You can do the same thing with a lot of like non-JavaScript based ones, but something like a Twilio integration would be impossible. Like there's NPM libraries for talking to anything. You can do whatever you want, whereas with other hardware solutions, you kind of get stuck in C or some other proprietary language where you have to create your own interface to something. I think that's the power of being able to use NPM.
Do you have any advice for how to move from being a web developer to a hardware developer like this? Other than buying, a Tessel and getting started, do you have any other advice on how to make that leap?
I guess, how would you, so I guess Tessel was created with the premise of it's really, really hard to teach web developers with current hardware how to go into electrical engineering. And I think what Tessel accomplishes is making it not scary, I guess. So I guess I'm not sure exactly what, are you saying what I would advise, assuming that there was no Tessel, or?
No, just in kind of what kind of background knowledge any of the courses maybe to take, what kind of stuff is good fundamental knowledge to have when you're dealing with electronics and things like this. For example, I bought a Raspberry Pi and I was hugely disappointed with it. I just got bored of it really quickly. This looks great. But I feel like I need some more fundamental kind of knowledge, maybe go back to school or something to learn more about hardware. Or are you saying that we just don't need that knowledge?
I do think that the knowledge of electrical engineering is still valuable and really useful. I think that if you wanted to make a project in an afternoon, probably your best bet from web development would just be to get a Tessel and put something together. We're actually trying to make it easier right now to make, to help guide people towards electrical engineering. And I don't think as a company this is the direction we're going in, but it is an interesting thing to look at doing. Is we're releasing, this isn't out yet, but I have this photo on my desktop. There we go. This is Tessel with a couple different pieces of proto board plugged in. And to accompany this is supposed to come out next week, I think, maybe a little later. But this is basically accompanied by a guide that I just wrote with the help from a contractor to try and introduce people to, here are the basics of how hardware talks to each other. And so it talks about the different protocols that are used here, not just GPIO. If you're using a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino, you probably were used to saying, well, turn this pin high or low, or maybe PWM it so that you can send slightly more complex messages. But we've just written a guide that talks about, from a web developer's perspective, here's how you might want to think about SPI communication. There's SPI, UART, I2C, are all different protocols that different hardware modules might might use to talk to each other. And that would be a really good direction to go in terms of starting to make things that are a little bit more complicated. I'm happy to talk to you after this too.
Yeah, I guess I can start asking questions on your forums as well.
Yeah, that's good too.
Okay.
Yeah, we're always happy
Thank
to
you.
talk on the forums. We might write you essays where you expected a short response, but yeah, sure.
All right, one more question up front here.
What's the OS underlying of your board?
The-
I'm sorry. What's the OS running in the board? Is that a version of Linux with the V8 running on top of that? Or?
No. Oh, so sorry. I should usually clarify this, and I usually forget. So this is actually our own custom real-time operating system based on LuaJIT. We wrote it. Yes, and I'm probably getting the semantics wrong because I don't work in that part of it. But we've got stuff on our blog talking about the specifics of exactly how it is turned into LuaJIT type stuff.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelsey.
Thank you.